Okay, our next speaker is going to be Professor Ricardo Terra from FAPESP, Brazil. He's going to continue the discussion of types of research projects funded in the humanities. Professor Ricardo Terra is a member of the Humanities and Social Sciences Committee of the Sao Paulo Research Foundation in Brazil. He obtained his doctorate degree in 1981 and is a full professor at the University of Sao Paulo. Professor Terra participated in several committees related to the assessment and planning of research and graduate studies in the humanities, and related to discussion that we've been carrying on right now. Professor Terra provides over the work group created at USP in order to advance the evaluation methods at the university. He's been the president of the Brazilian Kant Society, as well as the president of the Society of Kantian and French language. His academic work deals with German political philosophy, human sciences theory, and critical theory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I would like to start by thanking the event organizer, and in particular our hosts. I would like to apologize in advance for my terrible English and for not having sent my tests in advance. I have no time to make a PowerPoint presentation. I'm sorry. I represent an agency from the state of São Paulo that is state-run rather than a federal or national agency. Over recent years, national plans have tended to rather the technocrat regarding university and research funding. Thus, for example, the major Brazilian program, Science Without Borders, which aims to send 100,000 undergraduate and graduate students to undertake part of their studies abroad, does not include students from the humanities or social science. Of the 120 national institutes of science and technology that are part of the National Council for Scientific and Technological Development, only 10 are dedicated to applied social science, and there are none at all for the humanities. Despite this devaluation by federal agencies in relation to the humanities and social science, some programs do, however, encompass all areas. These include the evaluation support for graduate programs by CAPES, which is a body that coordinates higher education in Brazil, and which offers funding to top-ranking course and postgraduate grants for overall programs. The other federal agents, the National Council for Scientific and Technological Development, also offered grants to university. Since the start of the current Brazilian financial crisis, cuts have been made in all areas, but in comparison with other fields, it's very likely that humanities will have greater difficulties in getting research funding. But FAPESP, the São Paulo State Research Support Foundation, has a different profile. FAPESP is a public foundation funded by the taxpayer in the state of São Paulo with a mission to support research projects in higher education and research institutions in all fields of knowledge. São Paulo has a population of 40 million and generates 32% of Brazil's GNP. The state's constitution establishes that 1% of all taxes belong to the foundation, and the government transfers these funds on a monthly basis. The stability of the funding and the autonomy of the foundation allow for efficient management of resources, and these had considerable impact. While São Paulo has 22% of the Brazilian population and 30% of scientists with a doctorate in the country, it provides 45% of the country's academic articles published in international journals. The foundation works in close contact with the scientific community as a whole. All proposals are peer-reviewed with the help of area panels composed of active researchers. Besides funding research in all fields, the foundation also supports large research programs in biodiversity, bioenergy, global climate change, and neurosciences. FAPESP expenditure in 2014 was approximately $500 million. 40% of its expenditure supported fundamental research, 7% support research infrastructure, and 52% support application-oriented research. The percentage invested in applied research has grown consistently over recent years with the Foundation's mandate to force scientific and technological development in the state of São Paulo. FAPESP has partnership with national and international research funding agencies, higher educational and research institutions, and business enterprise. It cooperates internationally with a number of countries and agents, including UK Research Council, l'Agence Nationale de la Recherche en France, Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft in German, NSA, NIH, and so on. FAPESP also offers a range of programs to support foreign scientists who wish to work in research institutions in the state of São Paulo. These include postdoctoral fellowship, young investigation awards, and visiting researchers grants. The way in which the budget is divided between the various areas has been relatively stable over the last few years. In 2014, as has been the case in the past, healthcare received the large ration of research, 28%, due to the number of dedicated researchers in the field in São Paulo and due to demand for such projects. In second place, with 15% of the total is biology. And this is followed by the humanities and social science, 10%. The FGA is 15. It's 10%. Engineering, only 10%. It's different from the FGA. It's important to stress that the distribution of research in these different areas is not fixed a priori, and that around 40% of grants and funding requests are successful. Funding for the humanities and social science, which includes art and humanities, takes 10% of the total research. The above data gives an approximate percentage of the qualified demand in the various fields. Another relevant factor is that all FAPESP programs are open to the humanities, and there has as yet been no need to create any special program for the humanities. The humanities research community has not put forward any specific program so far, either because it's not being considered necessary or because there is a lack of institutional imagination. There are, however, special research programs in areas such as biodiversity, bioenergy, neuroscience, and not in the humanities. FAPESP does not currently see the need for any specific program for the humanities. Other programs to improve university libraries in the state of São Paulo and the support program for museum research are seen as programs that benefit all areas of research, not only humanities. As I mentioned earlier, the humanities are a part of all FAPESP regular programs, and the majority of these involve postgraduate students. grants for master's degrees and doctorate and postdoctoral research. In a country like Brazil, it is very important. The university research are public universities. And the grants for master degree and doctoral degree and postdoctoral degree is fundamental. We are not a rich country. I have written grants for doctoral and postdoctoral research, thematic projects, young researchers projects, and it's very important, the support for research infrastructure, including museums. Okay, this about the FAPESP. I would like to pose two questions, some challenges. The first with regard to national languages. And the second is about the current position of the humanities in relation to the science and what strategies can be used to add value to the former. On the issue of national languages, it is vital to consider the challenges of the humanities in non-English-speaking countries, such as Brazil, whose first language is Portuguese. In humanities, it is important to publish in the national language, particularly in literary studies, research in arts, and in national and regional history. However, written and publishing in Portuguese often creates tension in the dominant culture in university and research agencies regarding international demands, which tend to be understood through publication in English language in indexed journals. It is a sorrow that there are no representatives from Argentina, Mexico, and Chile here, but I am interested to find out if there are similar trends in Israel, France, Quebec, Germany, and Holland. I am also curious about how this tension between publication in various national languages is balanced with the pressure for international evaluation that is understood through publishing in English. Another vital issue is how research activities in the framework of the humanities are evaluated. My second point is how the value of postgraduate training in humanities is linked to the perceived value of the humanities themselves. The process of the evaluation of the humanities has been a gradual one. There have been numerous war of cultures, which have put the culture of the science in opposition to the culture of the humanities. Some of these wars have been more high profile, and others have been a continuous silent battle linked to certain trends such as the inexorable affirmation of modern science and technology. The development of modern science led to one of these conflicts, and the field of science allied with technology provoked another. The third conflict came with the consolidation of the social science as a further distinctive culture within the field of the natural sciences and humanities. There were conflicts in the process of developing new research procedures, organizing scientific institutions, and perspective on intellectual activity, and this takes us back to the Leibniz-Newton controversy. The Leibniz. There were also, of course, several other conflicts that followed, in which groups, movement, and adaptation of the cultural and scientific world ended up with disagreements between individuals. Some of the most important of these have been Thomas Huxley, Matthew Arnold, Snow Lewis, Alan Bloom, and Martha Nussbaum. A dispute about the canon and the concept of what is essential in human development, the so-called hoax, and others. How can one approach the current position of the humanities and research in this field without either trying to hold back time and return to a past that valued the humanities, or to embrace a discourse of victimization, treating the human science as a mere victim of the preeminence of science and technology. Defense movement for the humanities has numerous and proffer a range of diagnoses and solutions. There are books defending the humanities from various perspectives, from their importance for democracy, such as Martha Nussbaum's book, Not for Profit, Why Democracy Needs the Humanities, or the defense of our importance of education for the meaning of life, like Anthony Cromwell's. However, it is important to point out another central difficulty that is not to the, However, it's important to point out another central difficulty that is not to do with tensions between the science and the humanities. On the other hand, we have the antagonism between a short-term utilitarian pragmatic vision of the science and knowledge. On the other hand, we have an approach that values knowledge for itself and that values the expansion of knowledge in a human experience. From this perspective, the humanities may be able to work with science research that does not require an immediate application, and both of these suffer from the immediatism of utilitarian vision. Another seemingly contradictory approach to the humanities against a pragmatic and utilitarian approach to knowledge could be showing and detailing its value and applicability. These strategies can work together. They are not necessarily in opposition. This perspective on approaching the question of valuing the humanities leads us to a fundamental problem, that of how to evaluate research activities in the humanities. Should there not be certain elements peculiar to their evaluation? Does the concept of impact need to be extended, including both the impact of the text and their social and cultural impact? A dual strategy is clearly needed. On one side, the importance of humanities needs to be emphasized and to take into account various types of different arguments. On the other, it is important to refine appropriate assessment criteria and procedure for the humanities. To face the pressure regarding the use of quantitative criteria in the hard science, it's necessary to have clear and specific evaluation procedures in the humanities. This leads me to my final proposal, that perhaps we should schedule a future meeting in this forum that is dedicated to studying assessment procedures for the humanities. Yesterday, after a visit in the wonderful Israel Museum, I have read a report, The Metric Tide. I think it's useful for our discussion, a passage on page 44. I read, research conducted within the arts, humanities, and part of the social science often differ from much of the research conducted in the science in a number of fundamental ways. For instance, it has a strong national and regional orientation. For instance, more publications are likely to be written in language other than English. It is often published in books and other outputs, which are harder to measure quantitatively, objects, film, and ephemeral works. It can have a different configuration of theoretical development that operates at a different pace. It is difficult to introduce quantitative metrics of incremental work that is undertaken over a long period of time and is slow to develop. It depends on the scholar working alone, as well as in collaborative teams, so is sometimes less collaborative. It may be directed more at a non-scholarly public. And this paragraph, it is entirely appropriate that various research communities seek to articulate the value of their work in different ways. Perhaps Professor Rick Rance could speak about this very interesting report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Food for thought. Members of the panel, anyone?
Maybe I'll start because, Ricardo, I've always had a question about the Science Without Borders program, and it kind of touches on some of the other points that you raised about the relevance of the humanities and the relationship between humanities research and social science and particularly the sciences. But under the program, I mean, as you related, only students studying in certain areas were eligible to study abroad under Science Without Borders, and the social sciences, for the most part, other than communications, I believe, and management science or something, yes. And the humanities were completely excluded. And in Brazil, in talks that I gave around the time of the start of the program, students were very upset about this. Some universities were upset about it. What does that reflect? In terms of the intention of the government, is it just straight up utility argument that so that humanities, just is not going to matter in terms of national development priority? Yes. I know it's not. You don't have to defend Dilma, but maybe you don't want to. But I'm just curious.
Yeah, it is very different. The federal politics and the state politics, the state of São Paulo. The last time, the federal politics is technocratic, and the FAPESP, no. FAPESP is more, I have no, FAPESP is independent for the government of the state of São Paulo. And the federal agents, no. They are more related to government. And the federal government forced the applied science. That is the problem. And for us, another side of the question, for us, is the humanities is absolutely fundamental. We have a political, economic, and moral crisis in Brazil. And the humanities are fundamental for the increase of democracy in Brazil. We have a young democracy. We have 20 years of democracy only. And the humanities is absolutely fundamental. I think the federal government is making a great mistake. And unfortunately, not FAPESP.
Any other members of the panel?
Yes, I would like to say something about what you said about the assessment procedures, which should be specific to humanities. That's an issue that we often hear, and I think it is very important for us as research councils to have the right assessment for the proposals that you receive. Still, I think that also in humanities it goes about excellence. And excellence should be the prime criterion, I think, for research councils. So what you should be doing as a research council is to know what excellence is in the different disciplines. So, for instance, in lots of disciplines, in natural sciences, you have huge numbers of authors in one article. You have disciplines where the first author is the most important, and other disciplines where the last author is the most important. And it's very imperative for our review panels, the members for our review panels, to know what the publication culture is in the specific disciplines. If you can guarantee that, it might not be so important to do it specifically for humanities. If the review panels, they can even assess through the whole range of research fields if they know what the differences of publication culture should be. So I think that is very important task for the councils to make sure that evaluators know how to look at a CV and a publication list. And the second thing I would like to say is about this utilitarian principle. What I see is in most councils that the use of the research is becoming more and more important. In the Netherlands, it is also one of the criteria of assessment of research. Excellence, number one, of course, but it accounts for, I think, 10 to 15% of the scores in the criteria. So what we did as the Humanities Council is to give a lot of attention and a lot of PR work that it's not only about economic use. It is also about contribution to the public debate. That is what humanities do. So to have a range of fields where you can have this impact and not only economics. And at the same time you have to reiterate this again and again because everybody thinks of use in terms of profit.
I'd like to follow up on a question, two questions for what you said. So do research councils, this is open to all the members of the panel, do research councils actually have documents indicating how excellence is evaluated in different fields? Are you aware of any documents that have actually been produced for this? That's the first question. And the second question is essentially the same regarding to how to evaluate impact, public impact in the humanities. Are there any concept papers that can be perhaps shared or?
So I could start. First of all, the answer to the first question is there are general guidelines for reviewers. They are not discipline specific. In our council, they're the same, no matter whether it's, there's one exception, whether it's humanities or social sciences. Funding is made on the basis of excellence. Proposals need to talk about what they intend to do with their findings, but they do not have to couch these within the context of utility, only where the information will be shared. The exception that we make is to research that involves Aboriginal communities, where we now refuse to accept applications which, for Aboriginal research which do not involve Aboriginal communities themselves. And also, that's important, so I can't apply now myself to do research in Aboriginal community, would not be funded. Secondly, for the review committees, we did two things, and this is the only example of where we do this for Aboriginal research. Members of the committee must be from Aboriginal communities, some, not all. And secondly,
the review committee.
Yes. And secondly, they are instructed that they must take into account what are presented as Aboriginal ways of knowing. In other words, they contradict standard scientific evidence. And that's the only exception that we make. And I'm sure we're the only council that does this. And it's part of our own reconciliation efforts, given our issues with our own communities, and that we do this. But otherwise, there is nothing that speaks to disciplinary differences.
Well, if I may, this kind of explanation about the different publication traditions for every discipline is explained and briefed in an oral manner, I would say, to the chairs and the vice chairs of the committee. I don't think it's a very interesting question, and we should have a sort of a general document, yes, which establishes more or less, which gives instructions about this. But yes, we have constantly to learn, to teach to the to the member panel that if they are working for example, in a panel about social inequalities, and there is something about inequalities in health, that part of the publications may correspond to traditions by epidemiologists, for example, which have nothing to do with humanities. So, and that's it. But this kind of things, to what extent do we need to explicit all these things, to put it, to write it down? It's not that easy, no? But it's an important question.
Your two questions. We, as Ted described, we only have generic criteria which are issued to peer reviewers. You asked for a concept paper on impact. I think, this is developing slowly, but you might look at the debate that followed the Research Excellence Framework in the UK. The UK has what's called a dual support system for funding research, one of which is money goes to institutions through a periodic competition. And for the first time in 2014, it included a proportion which assessed the impact of this research. Now, it very carefully set it up as a way of evolving a debate, a methodological debate about how to do this, because no one quite knows how to do it. And there are publications coming out on that, reflecting on that process, which might be of interest to you. Can I open it up a bit more generally? This?
Sure.
Is your thoughts, Ricardo, about the you talked about Arnold and Huxley,
Yes.
Leavis and Snow, Bloom and Nussbaum, and so on. What always strikes me about these things is that they're adversarial debates. Okay, they're X against Y. They're binary categories. They're utilitarian or intrinsic. And I do think all of us have got to get out of doing that. We've got to think about it's not us and them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the humanities versus the natural sciences. And this is one reason why interdisciplinarity is so important, is increasingly a world in which there is common cause around common problems with common approaches and common interests. And I think that's the debate we've got to start. The problem for us in the humanities is that we are so bloody awful at doing it. We have, at least in the UK, and I would bet quite a lot of money that's true across the panel, we do a terrible job in advocacy for our own interests within our national governments. And in my 6 years of doing this job, it's not about encountering prejudice against the humanities in government. It's simply they don't understand what it is we do and why it's important. And the only people who are going to tell them why it's important are us. And we've got to take responsibility for that problem, I think.
I can just add something about impact. We have 9 criteria to evaluate every project for every discipline. And these 9 criteria are broken down into 3 families of criteria. And the one family of criteria about scientific quality or excellence or etc. So innovation, quality of hypotheses, clarity of hypotheses, like that. We have a second family about the organization of the project, which includes the qualification of the PI, the quality of partnership, and also the quality of the budget planification. And then a third family of criterion, these criteria are very classical, which turn around impact, but, well, scientific impact, the kind of publications that are planned, the impact with, society as large. And for example, an historical project about reconstitution of the bridge of Avignon, which involves archaeologists, historians, study of materials and things like that. Of course, if it is made jointly with the local authorities, and if the tourists can walk and visit the Pont d'Avignon with ANR, because all the reconstruction in 3D etc., have been made by, thanks to the subsidies of AIDA. We are very, very happy, okay? But, for example, a project in management issues or industrial organization, all the experts expect to have an important plan of, okay, to what extent this could be utilized by the actors, the private actors, and etc. So it depends from the disciplines, but of course, some disciplines such as mathematics or philosophy are sometimes intrigued by this factor, and we explain that, well, this is a long-term impact. It does not, we don't need to be able to identify immediately the direct impact of this. But a philosopher which deals about principle of justice, well, we have the naive idea that eventually it could contribute to improve the way we are able to solve dilemmas in our societies. This is but an example. So, and as a matter of fact, in spite of some resistance, we met with this third family of criteria. It works. And we realized that, in fact, the more severe judgments on all this family of criteria, because we made, of course, this detailed statistics about it, are about the budget. The researchers are perfectly able to to estimate that the budget of their colleagues is overestimated. They have to reduce it or to adjust it to the real, how many travels to Jerusalem, for example, is it necessary to go next year to Jerusalem and every year? So the experts are perfectly able to. So these are 2 or 3 of the 9 criteria, and I think we have a multiple judgment. We're not. I completely support what you told about the non-binary. The necessity of avoiding the binary opposition. We are judging among, we have a broad spectrum of criteria. Each criteria itself is estimated along a scale of, let's say, 5 points, for example. And so this enables, yes, flexibility, which is part of the evaluation process, a substantial part of the evaluation process.
I want to ask a radical question, partially because of its subversive nature. You know, I think about my field, and I think about which books have I read in the last year that are professionally relevant, and I think how many of them were funded by research. I think about my field, and I think about which books were published in the last year that I thought I had to read, and I think how many of them were funded by research grants. The answer is very small. Very small. And the question that I have is, and that I think we have to consider, is are we funding things the right way? Because we say we want large-scale collaborative grants, and we want these collaborative grants, and then we say which applications in that field is the best application. So, but we've already prejudiced the kinds of things we're going to fund because we say we want to fund these large-scale collaborative grants. And then, of course, it's a genre. You know, people are able to write that application better than other people. But then I look at the products, you know, and I can go back even into the 80s, the first time I ran into DFG projects of this kind, and I think, what did they actually produce? What kind of shelf life did it have? Is there any kind of follow-up 10 years after the end of a project, something like that, because that's enough time for it to sink in, about the impact or of the particular work that project has pursued. It has to be done late enough so it's time to penetrate, and B, it has to be done in a competitive field where you ask yourself, if the publication is, say, in German history, 19th and 20th century, what are the important books that were done and how many of them were funded by the DFG? You know, did you fund the biography of Bismarck? Did you fund, which ones did you do? I ask that question because if the answer to that question is negative, then maybe the answer isn't that we shouldn't be funding the humanities. The answer is that we have to rethink the kinds or genres of projects we want to fund if we want to fund real excellence in that area.
The question inside biography of Bismarck, I would put it in a different way. What kind of projects did we fund to make it possible for someone to write the biography of Bismarck? Yeah, it's not that there is a biography of Bismarck written by someone and he just does the whole research. No, he has to build on research already being done. On the other hand, you are correct somehow. We put a lot of effort in evaluating applications coming to DFG on which we decide whether we are going to fund or not to fund. We are not looking probably hard enough into the output, yeah? And we haven't got neither time nor staff, for example, to look what has happened to a project in 10 years' time. We think that the scholarly community itself will be able to evaluate also research results, for example, and impact. So if a DFG project had a broad impact in a specific field, it will create, hopefully, new questions, will help to build new collaborative research projects, and by itself then will generate new proposals coming to us which will be evaluated again. So I think it's a process which can't be only done by a research funding organization, but which has to be done by nature, by the community itself. What we do, for example, if you have been funded by DFG, you come with another proposal in 5 years' time. We look at your track record also at DFG, and we will at least see whether you produced a final report or publications. Yeah? So if you haven't, and if we see, for example, that you wasn't quite able to handle the budget properly, then we at least ask the reviewers, look, that's a track record of that person. He hasn't finished up any of his former projects which we have funded. He hasn't produced results in the proper way, that the results are open for the broader scholarly community. Do you trust it will be different that way? So in some cases then we ask people to add up information on that case, so it can be evaluated too. But it's a difficult and a sensitive point. And I think we also put too much effort into looking, when we evaluate proposals, on the possible impact. Yeah? What kind of impact to society? This makes us very vulnerable to political influence. And nowadays we want to have this and this. Yeah? So that's not really research. If you look, and that would be more appropriate, into a possible impact in its specific field. I'll give you just, and then I end up, an example from the field of archaeology. Yeah? We have got hundreds of tells, let's say in Mesopotamia. So 1, 2, 3, 4 have been excavated. Now there comes a person and says, I want to excavate the 5th. And he describes it from the organization very properly. So what we will ask then the reviewers to comment on, what possibly will we know further if the 5th has been excavated? Yeah? So that's the impact and the added value within the field itself.
Yeah. I'd like to add, to stress something. Wait for the microphone. To reiterate something, how adamant is the excellence in science criteria as opposed to other societal criteria? For instance, the NSF in the US, the program director has the discretion to decide which proposal receives funding over and above the scientific excellence. For instance, specific states receive more are more prone to funding, or if a program director, and we've heard this I've heard this from people from the NSF, if someone sees that his portfolio has a lot of funding in a specific area and they want to develop another area, they might choose a proposal which is less scientifically sound, obviously excellent, but less scientifically sound in order to develop this area. Is this something that is considered in your agencies or not at all?
No, we consider, for example, if I take the example of ENA, first of all, we have observed that there is a strong correlation between projects we have good evaluation from a scientific point of view, around the scientific excellence, and the projects which are well organized and with a strong impact. There is a strong correlation between the three family of criteria. And in the cases where you have an excellent project from a scientific point of view, which absolutely, with a miserable organization and absolutely no impact on society at every level, are extremely rare. And I think that, and it's striking. There is really, so you can, what you find is really between experts, differences in the ratings and the level of ratings. Some are more severe, the others are extremely generous, etc. So you can correct these kind of effects, or can identify them in order to give to the committee the possibility of correcting them. But the idea that one family of criteria would be completely in contradiction with the others is a prejudice. It's really a prejudice. Every observation that this period study we made about this has assessed a strong correlation between all these criteria. And the same for, I've been the director of a research institute during, I ran this institute for more than 10 years, and I can say that this is true also at the level of the individual researcher. A good researcher, this is substantial part of the office of a researcher. A good researcher must be excellent in science, must be a good organizer, and must also have an idea of what is the use in very general terms, not in a utilitarian, strict or narrow definition, but he must be aware of all these dimensions, and this is part of the office.
I would like to be a bit provocative in this regard, okay? If
No,
I
I'm
may.
quite...
No, if I may. There may be different sub-areas of, or different kinds of research activities in the humanities that there may be different sub-disciplines in the humanities that have different criteria for excellence, and some may be more given to disagreement among evaluators than others. Okay, so if you're preparing a scientific edition of a medieval document, and you have all the necessary qualifications to do so, it stands to reason that you're going to send it out and you're going to get very good reviews. But if you're developing a sort of a cutting edge theory in some very theoretical area, say in philosophy, stands to reason that your proposal will provoke a lot of disagreement among the reviewers. And the question is whether those things are taken into consideration in the evaluation procedures.
I'm a philosopher by my background. And I can tell you that, for example, theories about theories of justice, development about theories of justice. How can they develop without having the slightest consideration on how it can be useful for societies? Societies in the north, in the south, everywhere. So not directive, but all what we can say about the right, the good, beautiful, and things like that have a direct connection with our ideals, our values, etc., etc. So I cannot imagine, and our experts are briefed in that way, that it is useless. And I take very often another example. I remember Jean Bottero was the famous Assyriologist, and at the time of his 18th anniversary, he made a speech and saying, what I love in Assyriology is the fact that it is completely useless. He was wrong. He was wrong, because if you read Jean Bottero, it is fascinating. It's about the origins of religion. It's about our origins, the origins of the Occidental world and the Western and Eastern world and civilization and so on and so on. So even if you take this example of a study of remote civilization, of course it is useful. Of course we need to have an idea of this origin. So it depends really on the way you are qualifying, you are identifying the utility of something. If it is, even if you look at the Bentamian definition of utilitarianism, which is in fact a very broad definition, the pleasure it gives you, when I read an Assyriologist, I enjoy it because I learn something. And the very fact that we are learning something about our civilization, our past, our origins, etc., is sufficient.
I was actually, I agree with you, I agree with everything you said. I was actually referring to the fact that in certain areas you'll find extreme differences of agreement, extreme differences of opinion among the evaluators themselves, whereas in other areas that's not likely to be the case. Yes, okay, Anna.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's why an essential element of the peer review process in my organization is the rebuttal. So the review reports will go to the applicant and he and she reacts upon that. And the committee that ranks the proposals gets the reviews plus the rebuttal. So we see, for instance, that you can rank them A, B, and C, and unfundable. In this case, you get the unfundables, the A's and the unfundables together. But when you have a good rebuttal, and you can show that it is just because it's new that there is a discrepancy in the evaluation reports, they still can come up. So it's a very essential element of the review process.
We have a number of safeguards, not just that one, but also when peer review, there was always more than one, usually 3 peer reviews. And if one of those comes in and it's actually prejudicial or overly partisan, you simply send it back to them and say, do a proper one. And if they don't, you commission another one. And then there's a moderating process after that. So there really are safeguards about that.
But we do something similar, but really the ultimate responsibility lies with the actual review panel. They solicit the external reviews, they interpret the reviews, the written expert reviews, and then they take a decision based upon that and what else they're looking at in the file. But is anybody suggesting that it's perfect? Not at all.
We have time for one more question. Owen, did you have a question that you want to ask?
Yeah, I wanted maybe to continue. I wanted to continue Gabi's point. I think I'm less worried about the evaluation criteria because in many cases the evaluators are people from humanities, so they can know how to rank the proposal on the basis of excellence or merit. I'm a bit more worried about what I see is that the research agencies, they sometimes impose the organizational structures of experimental science on the humanities. And I'll give you an example from the Israel Science Foundation. So, for instance, one of the motivation of the Israeli humanities people to submit grants is that they want to support students, to give funds to fellowships to the graduate students. So we write a proposal, we submit it, then we get it, now I have the money, I want to support my students. My best students, they write their dissertations, even their postdoc, whatever thesis, on subjects that are not in somewhat different areas. So, for instance, I submitted a grant on the topic of causation, okay, and I have a student, a great student who writes on free will. And because, I mean, the nature of the research in humanities is that people is much more individualistic. It's not that we have a lab and we have, you know, many people who work on exactly the same areas and topics that we do, but it's, I have like 5 students and each one of them is working on different topics. Now I have the dilemma. And we have this dilemma in the humanities. Can we give the money we got for a certain grant, for a fellowship, for a student who work on a different topic? And there is an internal debate today in humanities. And I see the same problem, again, I'm going to the German system, with that in a sense, with all this concept of temporary positions, that you have the professor who has this the research topic, and all the people there, they must work within this group on the very same topic, as if it is, you know, a lab in the experimental sciences. But in many cases, I think it's just not the same. I mean, the nature of research in humanities is somewhat different, and I'm not sure that there is a match between, you know, the organizational structure of the humanities and this is basically, I think this is Gabi's point. I think Gabi says, well, you know, I don't need, I could write my book on Bismarck, right? Regardless of whether I have my grants or not. We need the grants for, the grant money for, in many cases for different purposes.
A brief answer. If you succeed in linking the free will issue with the causation issue, you will make a fantastic advance in philosophy, and we are able to recruit a good philosopher who is able to identify this as a fantastic innovation. And this kind of issue is exactly the same in chemics, in physics. You have exactly the same situation. If you are able to connect two problems which are traditionally considered as separate, you make one fantastic advance. And I would like to conclude that, in fact, we should not claim exceptional treatment for humanities. We should claim for humanities an ordinary treatment, the treatment which we need for science, and that's it. Because if we continue to say, well, but humanities are very special, they are outliers, they are out of the ordinary law, etc., we are really underrating humanities. We must apply to humanities exactly the same criteria as for other sciences, and they are perfectly able to cope with these requisites.
I strongly endorse that. If we go down the route of exceptionalism, we lose.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. No, I certainly agree in terms of what is considered excellence. I've always said that when people say that critical thinking is in the domain of the humanists, I've always said I haven't seen that humanists are better critical thinkers than anybody. Critical thinking is a stance that some people have and some people don't. But the point that Ron was bringing up was a much more technical point. Right? It was a much more technical, the fact that the grants in many of the experimental sciences, right, fund the lab work, which is led by the supervisor, and the students are essentially doing components of the supervisor's research, whereas in the humanities, typically these things are, and so there's something of, you know, we apply, we build our budget, and then when we get the money, we use it in a different way. And there's a sense in which this is not, you know, I shouldn't be saying this in
I
public,
don't
right?
think I don't think it's really true, you see. Of course, you've got the lab. You have got the supervisor, and he needs funding for stuff. So he'll put it in an application. Now, in the humanities, the lab, now I'm coming from archaeology, is the excavation, the tell, yeah? You
Well,
also
archaeology is the outlier.
you do it in,
Archaeology is like
It is the
experimental
outlier,
science.
yeah.
Math is like philosophy.
yeah, but then if you want to be independent in maths, that's what I've said in the beginning. The principle, the temporary principal investigator application will exactly allow you this. At an early stage in your academic career, to have your independent possibility of working on a topic you want to do, yeah? Because you first choose the topic, you come up with the application, and you'll just give us a paper by a university which says, okay, if he gets that grant, we'll temporarily employ him or her, give him a room or give him something, yeah? Because we can't allocate money just in a kind of private case, yeah? But so you are independent doing your research from whatever else, and they are, and this has to be signed. They are not allowed to give you an order saying now you have to do 3 or 4 hours teaching a week. No, you can independently work up to 6 years on your specific topic.
I'm gonna add something even more pragmatic from our point of view, and that is that we don't check. I mean, you have to do a report, you have the money, you have to say what you did, but you know, if your student went off and reinvented the theory of relativity, we don't check. You know, good for him, her, fantastic.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll be reconvening at 2 o'clock.